profligate spending of other people's money that he'd gotten through deception.
His victims describe him as the embodiment of American greed. An East Texas man who pretended to be a decorated war hero and a rich oil man, now going to federal prison. Good evening and thank you so much for joining us tonight. A federal judge sentenced a Smith County man to a little over 11 years in prison today for using stolen valor to defraud investors, the largest sentence ever imposed in relation to a fraud scheme involving the Stolen Valor Act. And while Derek Ham did serve in Iraq, his claim of being a Special Forces war hero was nothing more than a lie.
They all felt betrayed by this persona that he created for himself.
Federal prosecutor Robert Wells says Derek Ham presented himself as a wealthy and successful war hero, claiming to be a member of the Army Special Forces who had been awarded a Purple Heart, Bronze Star, Silver Star, and Distinguished Service Cross. And those weren't his only lies.
So he would meet up with folks through friends, and he presented himself as being related to a billionaire oil man with the same last name, Ham, and same spelling, out of Oklahoma. And he represented that he had 7,000 wells in many states, and people were, they trusted him because he was, as far as they knew, a decorated war hero, and they'd come up with contracts for oil investments, and they weren't true.
In court, victims spoke of Ham's over-the-top charm and charisma that made him believable, saying he would tell stories about being a paratrooper and even bragged about the number of enemies he killed, all while trying to get them to invest in his made-up ventures, resulting in the loss of one couple's life savings and betrayal of another couple hoping to secure a financial future for their child with special needs.
He didn't own any wells. He was not a successful oil man. He was not related to the billionaire. He took all the money that people gave him, and within hours he would go and buy jewelry, pay off his wife's vehicle, buy a vehicle for his child who wasn't even old enough to drive yet. Just profligate spending of other people's money that he'd gotten through deception.
A successful and noble persona used to disguise a failed business and what prosecutors say were dishonest intentions.
And in court this morning, Ham said he was sorry for wasting everyone's time and denied ever having malicious intent, claiming he got carried away. Now, along with that federal prison sentence of 11 months, Ham was also ordered to pay over $2.2 million in restitution. To date, the government has collected over $350,000 through forfeited property like Ham's vehicles, his cash, and jewelry. Money that will all go towards restitution.